if you fall into a hole, let's say, then you can get that sense of why death, or that, why hell is represented underground, because it's an intuition that we have when it happens to us. Like if you sink underwater, if you when you fall, it's when you fall and you hit your head on the ground and you're down there on the ground, and all you see is the particular, let's say, and you don't have a sense of scope and of scale and what is going on in general.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings, this is Byrne, and welcome to the Anadromist, coming to you on what would be considered a very snowy day here, which for me is just a bit of goop on the road, but an enjoyable bit of white goop nonetheless. Well, where were we? There's so many things. Today we're going to have another in our series of Anadromous dialogues about, what was it? Oh, well over a year ago. I contacted Jonathan Pageau. I sent him an email saying, hey, maybe we could have some sort of dialogue. And about 3-4 weeks ago, he got in touch with me and said, okay. And I said, okay, well, why not? I didn't even remember that I had written to him. But nevertheless, I figured we would have an interesting conversation, and we certainly did, as evidenced by the video coming up. Before we get there, though, I would like to remind you that you can indeed like this video if you are so inclined, and that helps the algorithmic things find us. Also, if you're coming from Jonathan Pageau's world, and I know he has an awful lot more subscribers than I do, well, welcome aboard. And if you like this channel, poke around on it. I've got a lot of perennial topics here. Subscribe. And if you really like this channel, then you can contribute if you give $50 or more, or $10 a month through PayPal. I will send you extras. And woefully, I must admit, in all of this going to Prague and the events of the day, I kind of got a little behind on some of my passing out the extra goodies, the audio extras. So if you're waiting, they should be coming. If you want to remind me below, you can do that too. Without any further ado, here is Jonathan Pageau in a conversation we had a few days ago. Actually, by the time you watch this, over a week ago. Enjoy. Or, as the French say, profitez.
I'm recording just so we don't forget to record, because I've done that before. All right, and so you're in Tbilisi. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, Tbilisi, Georgia, a very interesting place to be right now. They had a gathering on the 24th, the night of the invasion, where there's photos of it in online. I wasn't here. I was in Prague. But it looked like, I don't know, 80, 90,000 people in front of the parliament. And the Georgians take this extremely seriously. They are more about, they were invaded by the Russians in 2008. and they had a 5-day war. And it goes back to, they had breakaway republics, which it was almost the exact same pattern as Ukraine. And so, and they too are an Orthodox country. One of the most, by population statistics, one of the most Orthodox countries there are. I think it's like 80, last I saw it was something like 83% of the population was in some sense Orthodox. And they are, now my observation is there's a lot of nominalism in there, but but fascinating place to be right now. I was in Prague, and that was also fascinating because they remember 1968 and 1938. And they're not right on the front line like Poland, but they're on the next line back. And they, it's just too close. So then a day later, I guess not to be outdone by Georgia, they had about 80,000 people show up in Wenceslas Square.
Wow, so, that's crazy.
And
I imagine people in Georgia are just watching, like, how far is this going to go? Like, what's the end game here? Yeah,
and I had a couple Georgians say to me, "So are you going to leave?" And I said, "Why? It's my home. I'm living here now." And you don't abandon people because it's like times get tough. So if I have to leave someday, then I will. But apart from that, no.
And also, I think it's people who haven't lived in conflict areas, they struggle to mentally understand what that looks like or what that feels like. We always have because we're used to movies, we have a sense in which conflict is this ever pervasive thing that's everywhere all the time, but that's not exactly how you experience it. No. I lived in war-torn areas, for several years, and you can be 2 streets away from a riot and it's not happening where you are. And so you just kind of live your life, and you're careful, and you're attentive to what's going on. So it's not exactly, it's not exactly the way people sometimes imagine it, because we just see we see the images of the horrible things that are happening. So we focus on that, but that's not how life works,
Yeah. I lived in New York City for 16 years and was part of the art world and the music world there. So that was something. But, I had people dying in my neighborhood. One morning I was waken by a bunch of people kind of scrambling around outside in front. I lived on the 2nd floor, and I look down and I see there's police line and people kind of coming around. Interestingly enough, all the Black and Hispanic people who lived in the area were staying and watching the whole thing. But every time someone who was more like me, white, come to the city to be an artist or something, would come around the corner, they would figure out what was going on. Then they would immediately go like, "No, I can't handle this," and leave. And it turned out they opened up the car in front of me that was right below me. And there was like guys down below me going like, "What's it look like, man? Come on, tell me."
Oh, man.
And they pulled out. I mean, the first thing that happened was a summer day was the funk came out of the car when they opened it. There was a car that was blocked off, and they were waiting for the photographer. And then they brought the body out, and I've never seen a hole. It was like that big coming out of one side of the guy's head. And so I went like this to the guy, and the guys on the street who were looking, they got like, "Oh, Mama Mia," just like. But
the guy been shot in the car, like he'd just been shot, or he had been put.
Yeah. And I think I heard it the night before, But in New York City, there was a lot of tension. Then I went to live in Alaska, and there, I eventually ended up giving tours to bear, just for people to see bears. And we would stand, I don't know, 10, 20 meters away from a bear without a car between us, no fence or anything, as they were eating. And I would have to give everyone safety talks. I had to learn the behavior of bears. So
grizzlies or brown bears, black bears?
Well, the grizzly and the brown are basically the same bear.
Okay.
It depends on where they live. If they live far enough away from the salmon and the coast, then they're a grizzly bear, and they're much more aggressive. Because
I was going to say.
Yeah, but these were technically Alaskan brown bears. Like I say, physiologically pretty much exactly the same. But I once told people, I'm about 6 feet tall, and I told people, see how tall I am? They go, yeah. I said, I once saw a bear that tall sitting down.
Yeah.
And then they would blink for a minute, and they'd be like, huh? And I think one of the largest bears ever shot was shot in our neck of the woods. But I would tell people, truthfully, moose kill more people than bears, so don't worry about it. And we had moose in that valley too. So, but actually, the thing that killed the most people, I was there for 22 years before I moved here 3 years ago. The thing that killed most people was water, either ice or just spending any amount of time in the fjord in front of us. I actually almost died in the river. I was in a canoe with a guy who didn't know what he was doing and just bought a canoe, and it was just, and we went down, and fortunately we didn't die, but we ended up stuck on an island in the middle of this glacial river and had to navigate our way back.
Without your canoe? With your canoe or without it?
Without it.
Yeah, you lost a canoe. Yeah.
So I tend to take danger not as something I'm looking for, but just as, it's like in my mind, I shift. As soon as something happens, I go from we were here to we're no longer here.
Yeah.
We're now here. So that I as soon as COVID came, I said, there is no 2019. I mean, yeah, there's a 2019, but that world, and it really is gone now.
Yeah, for sure.
And
it seems like there's no going back to what was there before. That's
no, there is a world that just disappeared. And, we used to say in America, there's September 10th. But the difference between September 10th and September 11th is far less than the world that we've just come out of.
Yeah, definitely. No,
and having nostalgia for it and wanting to go back is probably the worst thing I think a person could do.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's really about trying to see forward and developing strategies as things kind of develop and developing, or at least I think it woke us up to, let's say, what's coming, and woke us up to how we need to be attentive to what types of things we need to be attentive, and figuring out that at some point we're gonna, I think, like at some point this whole online thing is gonna at least for some of us is gonna end. We're gonna have to change.
Yeah.
I don't know when, but at some point it seems like it's gonna become inevitable. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just finishing up a video that's about 2 hours and 20 minutes long, and it's called War Propaganda. Or it's really called Surviving War Propaganda. And I talk about how every side has a war propaganda. And the thing is, the thicker things become, the more frightening it gets, the more the propaganda comes. And it's different than the normal daily propaganda, the iPhone stuff and all of that, because war propaganda is like, loose lips sink ships, which means you don't speak out about certain things. It's just a totally different thing. I don't know if we're ready for that, because people are going to think we were where we were 3 years ago. Yeah. And we move into that, we're in a different world, you see.
Definitely. And, definitely. Well, I mean, for sure, for you, it's also more even sensitive than we are because of where you are. Then all of a sudden it becomes a life question of what you, what you say.
I have a friend here who's half Ukrainian, half Georgian, and her family in Ukraine have been fleeing. There's some of her family members are in Kharkiv, which has been pretty much leveled. And, she doesn't have a place for this in her brain. And she got in touch with me trying to see if she could get a friend of hers and her daughter out of there, and I gave her what information I could, but it's, this is the real thing. One of the things I said on my, I'm upload it tomorrow, probably, my Surviving War Propaganda video is, the world of postmodern irony and LOL and, all of that. It's over. I mean, you can keep doing it, but you'll be like, the frog still in the pot while the water is boiling. Yeah. We're just in a different world, and I don't know if, are we still, and when I say postmodern, I don't mean philosophical. I mean the general ironic tenor of the culture. Are we still there? I think we just killed it.
Yeah.
I think between COVID and all the propaganda that's been circling around for the last 5-6 years or more, it's been growing, and you obviously know this. And I think we're in a different zone entirely now, and we don't have a name for it yet, but it's certainly one thing's for certain. It's really clear now that the time between 1945 and 2019 was a bubble.
Yeah, that's what actually.
And that bubble included more and more people around the world as it grew. There are shopping malls here that look like you're in California. But will people be able to afford going to them?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been talking about the idea of the end of the carnival for a while, where, we could see that we were in a carnival, but that the carnival was coming right up to its limit. Like it was spiraling in a manner that was, let's say, asking to end, and that I wasn't sure how it was going to end. I could see that it was going to end. I didn't know what type of clampdown was coming. I actually thought it would be a weird, like identitarian type clampdown. That's what I thought, like a reaction to the woke and stuff. But ultimately it seems like it's just a continuation, but like a weird clampdown of the like an acceleration of what Jordan Peterson went through in 2016, like a worldwide version of it. And COVID seems to be part of it, like a weird emphasis on safety, like an obsession with safety, obsession with being safe and everything. And so, and then that, as we move into like a highly media, let's say, infused war, then it just ramps up even more. People don't realize that there are reasons. It's hard to know how it works, but there are reasons why no one sees images. You see very few images of what, let's say, the US does in Iraq or the US did in the countries that they invade. You don't see images of that. They don't appear. And then all of a sudden, like now we're flooded with like these horrible images of war. And it's like, it's dramatic because we don't tend to see those a lot. And you'd think that we would, because there's wars happening all over the world, but all of a sudden we're like inundated with all these images.
Well, for one thing, Ukraine isn't like any place in the Middle East to us. Canada, the third largest ethnic group after, I guess, the Anglo types and the French, is then Ukrainians.
Yeah, there's a huge number of Ukrainians in Canada.
Yeah. And America has over 1 million. And one of the things I did in my video is just read how many are all over the place. Brazil has 600,000, So
yeah, and so the connection is stronger for sure. Like for Canada, the connection is very strong.
Well, also, no one was thinking that Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria might kick off the Third World War.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's a radical difference, because suddenly, I'm part Ukrainian, part Polish, plus there's Norwegian and Scottish there. But the two Eastern European parts of me are very well aware of what, when I first went to Poland, I felt like this ground just like bleeds history. It's just everywhere you go. There's Auschwitz. There's, the entire city of Warsaw was leveled. And I ended up interviewing a puppeteer. Puppetry is something that I've been studying for years, as well as music and film and everything. But I ended up interviewing the preeminent history of puppetry in Europe, who's since passed on. But when he was a teenager, he was a combatant in the Warsaw Uprising, which means he was in a place where 250,000 people died, basically because the Nazis were leaving the town in 1944 because they knew the Soviets were on the other side of the Vistula River. The Soviets got there, saw that the Nazis were leaving, and so they just kind of camped on one side of the river. And then the Nazis realized, they're not doing anything. So the Nazis, hating the Poles so much, turned around. Basically, the order was level it. And the Soviets let it happen because essentially they said, we don't want that government installed. And when you're dealing with stuff like, Kiev was totally decimated as well. and Manila, Berlin, the cities that were just absolutely leveled. And I've often thought, and you'll hear Americans say this all the time. It's just like, everything's going to work out for the best. I'm going like, imagine being in Kiev in 1944 and saying, the city is being leveled and saying everything's going to work out for the best. And being a good Christian.
Yeah.
There are many good Catholics in Warsaw. But was God not there? No. But I was thinking of this today. I had this thought. People often, I was just kind of walking around and people say, how could God let this happen? Particularly something like a war.
Yeah.
And all these people dying and suffering. And I'm going like, how come you never say that when someone, say, drops a lit cigarette on the ground? And the ground becomes, you're in certain parts of the city and the ground is covered with cigarette butts. How come you never say that when someone creates plastic bottles and now the oceans are filled with them? You don't say it then. How could God let this happen? Well, it's the same thing, but obviously God has allowed us the free will to not only affect ourselves, but to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah.
And,
it's definitely the mystery of, just in general, the mystery of suffering and the mystery of you can see how, it's not God who's fighting. It's not God who's doing this war, right? It's it's Putin that's attacking Ukraine, and it's the Russian soldiers that are bombing the cities. Right. It's not God that's doing that. And the fact that it's Christians who are, some Christians who are, let's say, participating in this makes it very difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Well, part of it is there's a thing that I learned about this about 5 years ago, but I didn't quite register it until now. And I've gone back and done a bit more research on this guy named Alexander Dugin.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've heard his name.
Yes.
But evidently he had come up with this idea that was the Bolshevik Nationalist Party.
Yeah.
Which was essentially a variation on, fascism. So, but what he did was originally he was more connected to the pagan wing, which is what some of these guys in Ukraine are connected to.
Yeah, some of these more Nazi types in Ukraine. There.
But then what he did was he changed, and actually the Russian Orthodox patriarchs condemned his thoughts and especially he started changing it into a Christian form. Yeah. And they condemned his thoughts as heresy. However, being patriarchs in the Russian church about 20 years ago, they're all dead because, the patriarchs are never like young guys. So it's suddenly there's a weakness that's gone in to the church, and Putin has, picked up on this. And also what's happened is there's a racial element to it. There's this Eurasian idea that the Russians are racially different than the other people. And you'll hear in Putin's speech, he talks about these people who are part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Dugin himself talks about these like kind of mongrel Slavs. They're not real Slavs. You see, this idea seeped in. Now, my feeling is that the average Russian, I've been watching interviews with Russians, and the average Russian, like younger people, they're naive. They don't understand what's happened. Every now and then you'll meet one who's like, we have to do this because Ukrainians are about to attack us. I'm sitting there going like, why would Ukraine ever attack Russia? Don't you understand? It's kind of like, Canada attacking America. Why would that happen? Yeah. It's just it would be a strange thing. But I'm convinced most Russians aren't. It's not like they've all joined this cult or all the churches have joined this cult. But there's this pressure there that's and because Dugin was so close to Putin,
Do you think so? I mean, I know that it's weird that this is coming back again. It's like I fought the Duginites 20 years ago. Like a long time ago.
You were there when they were starting to get in, but the whole idea became more. It's more seductive now. Sorry about this. I've got someone honking. I don't know if you're hearing it.
No, I think that for me, like the problem I had with Dugin at the outset was the same problem I had with Evola I mean, he really is an Evola guy.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really the confusion between the hierarchical levels. That is, he weaponizes Christianity to political ends. And he sees the state or the political sphere as the highest sphere, and then he kind of subsumes the spiritual to that, which is what Evola does in his text too, which is why Evola was such a political actor. And so to me, like, that's everything comes out of that problem. Like all the nationalism, all the racial stuff, all that stuff comes out of confusing the hierarchy. If you put, let's say, national types of identities as the highest form, then it's inevitable that you come to those types of conclusions where you think, like, our people, and you have a sense in which the Orthodox Church is a tool for unity in terms of national unity, and all of that comes once you've made that basic confusion.
Well, one of the things that people have pointed out is that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and I've read pretty much everything he's done except for the Red Wheel so far, and I have a documentary, about 3 hours worth of conversation with him, which is really amazing. But at some point he praised Putin, but Solzhenitsyn died in early 2008, and I think he took Putin at his word that, he wanted to restore the Russian Orthodox faith and such like that. And also I think Putin has changed over the years. He has become more of whatever he is now. People are trying to figure out, what has he become? But it's amazing how much of what he is like now was forecasted by Dugin, in a sense. And he was a close advisor for a while, and it still has general admission to the Kremlin. So he wormed his way in, and he's almost like a Rasputin kind of character.
Yeah, but there is a way in which what's happened since Putin has become president, which is very impressive in terms of, I think he built, 20,000, 30,000 churches since he's been there. And not him itself, but let's say created the space and the possibility and the room for that to happen. And so there are some things that are pretty impressive. But let's say, he's not a spiritual figure. He's a political figure, just like any political figure. And so I think we have to be careful not to put our hopes in political figures, because they live in that world. They live in a world of conflict and war so I think it would, for people who put too much hope in him, I think that's definitely was a mistake, because he's not a saint. He's a warrior.
What he did though was after the catastrophe of the Yeltsin, especially the end of the Yeltsin years, where Yeltsin was barely able to stand up at meetings and was just so taken by alcohol that Putin came along and essentially, I think Putin was a man who was deeply disturbed and humiliated by the end of the Cold War and then continuing into Yeltsin's reign. And so I think one of the great things he felt most important was to restore the pride to Russia. And I think many of the things he did accomplished that end. The Russians, what's ironic and sad about this whole moment is the Russians have never had it as good as they have it right now.
Yeah.
They were living a life of, they were no longer the Russians of the 90s who were, terribly suffering, They were no longer the Russians who were, basically all the women were trying to get married off to someone who wasn't a Russian. They were no longer those people, and
the mail-in Russian bride cliche.
Exactly. And I follow various Russian YouTubers, and they've all been, of course, hit by this. Most of them can't make any money anymore.
Yeah.
And listening to these Russian YouTubers, they're just normal people. You know, they some of them are funny, and some of them are very sincere and personable. And you know, sometimes they'd let leak out that they didn't like certain things happening in the government, but they would be kind of like, don't take that too far, kind of thing. And you know, the Russians had, you know, YouTube, and they had Facebook and credit cards and everything, you know. And now, you know, what will that do? Will it create a separate world? Like I say, we're in a different world. We just entered a different world. We don't know even what it means. Yeah.
But I think it's also, at least for me, at least for us, it's an interesting continuation of what happened here in Canada, let's say in the past few months with the trucker convoy and the cutting of bank accounts. You know, we've been watching it happen for a while, since the first Trump election. We've been watching people, at first very fringe actors, get their bank accounts removed, their credit cards removed, and PayPal cut off. And at first you think, well, you know, I don't agree with that person at all. I don't agree with his views in any way. I think he's dangerous or whatever, but you still watch it happen, and you watch it grow and grow and grow. And then it becomes totally normal, where people have accepted that this is a normal political tool to cut access to people's funds. And so as we watch what's going on in Russia, we're seeing it even more, where, you know, it's like you realize, oh, you know, that Google Pay thing you use? Well, Google can just turn it off. They can just turn it off. And that's what they're doing there. But it doesn't mean that, why do you think it's not going to happen inside here? Like, it's not going to happen, you know, inner country politics won't make that happen as well. It definitely will, especially as things continue to polarize. So we need to be, that's what I meant at the outset when I talked about how at some point we have to find ways to check out somehow before it's too late, because.
Yeah. Well, as I tell my friends here in Georgia, I have a very large library that weighs probably about 6,000 kilos, and it's in Alaska, and I'm trying to bring it here. And I've had friends say, like, you know, in Georgia, we're, shall we say, outside of the normal jurisdictions. So it's like any movie we want, there's a system here for watching it that you don't pay for. You know, it's just a strange country that way. There's a lot of stuff. So people say, like, why would you want to buy anything when you can just download it or stream it, you know? And my thought is, no, you really don't understand what's coming. For one thing, we need physical things. You know, people talk about taking care of the earth, and yet they're digital nomads. Well, you're not taking care of any earth that way, because you don't have a plot of ground to touch and feel and to work with, you know. But we don't have also a connection. We need the connection to physical things in order just simply to understand the nature, you know. So when I buy a book, I try to buy, as inexpensively as possible, the best copy I can get of it, as opposed to a cheap mass market paperback, which I know is just disintegrating. Something I can pass on to people. But I have had one friend here said, I started buying books because of you. And I said, thank you, you know, because it's just like, you know, when you have a book on the shelf, it's calling to you to be read. When you have, you know, 200 books on your Kindle or iPhone or whatever, what does it matter? You know, but I think what we don't realize is that for me, and I would also then say, well, you know what, well, how do you think the next war will be fought? It's not just simply all going to be on the land. It's going to be, you know, cyber attacks, which are going to try to take down all the communication networks. Or, as we've recently seen, you know, the new sanctions are going to strip away all of the, you know, the excesses of the internet coming from outside that were really affecting the way Russians lived. Maybe not for the best. In fact, someone I know recently said, if someone said they were taking away Google and Facebook and all this stuff from you, it would just be like, I can breathe again. Maybe I can read a book.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. I understand that. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what's going on. Like you said, the war, like the digital war, and how fragile digital technology, what it does. This is something I've been thinking about for a very long time. People don't realize our own civilization, how thin it is. That is, as we move towards everything being online, there'll be no trace of our civilization in a few thousand years. There'll be nothing left, because all we have are magnetic things on these discs made of plastic and of all these strange materials that aren't going to survive. We have nothing written in stone. We have nothing. We have, all our buildings are made of iron and glass. And so in a few thousand years, our civilization will just be wind. Like it just.
And that iron and glass is almost an effrontery to nature, because it's saying we will stay shiny and tall forever.
Yeah.
And you can't. I mean, eventually all things wear down. So even that illusion of shiny perfection will disappear.
And so I was wondering, are there some things you would wanted to talk about? Like, because I know you reached out to me quite early, but it's been like a few years now. So I don't know if there was some things you were curious about, some subjects you were hoping to discuss.
Well, one of the things I have worked on quite a bit is kind of a different approach to symbolism than yours. And I thought there were probably some things related to that might be of interest to discuss between us. Also, because I am a Christian and I have quite a connection to the arts. And I was just thinking that in those realms, there was probably something. One thing that I did, and you might find this interesting, is a few years back, this has been growing in me for a while, and I started working with puppets as a form of art. And this I started back in 2005. And one of the reasons I did was because I realized, okay, what are going to be the arts of the 21st century? And I said, music essentially has become like soundtrack. You just put it in and you look at the world through this thing. It's like you change the soundtrack depending on what you want your world to be. And there is still good music being made, but it no longer serves the function as, like music in the 1970s and 80s and 90s and 60s was all about revolution and change, and music's going to do something. But I think it was already wearing out by the time Kurt Cobain killed himself. So then there was, I looked around. Film was also a thing I looked at, but I could also see this weird division between, these big budget films, which are so often hollow, and as you pointed out, parasitic, as we have the newer forms of, woke storytelling. But they're also, then individuals can make whatever they want. Well, great. So we have YouTube for that, or, Vimeo or something. But people don't really, it isn't something like, there isn't a film revival as a result of that, even though, I've made a few small things, but but I looked and I said, the music and film were the two big arts, the most indicative arts of the 20th century. And I thought, what would be the art of the 21st century? And I thought puppetry. And the reason I thought of puppetry, because I had seen that puppets could be used for much more than folk culture or, children's entertainment. And then I saw that, the puppet, to really appreciate it, has to be seen in person, much like dance does. And that was something I also started to follow. It has to be seen in person. Yes, you can watch a video of it, but it's not quite the same. Although one of the things that got me into puppetry was certain Czech animation films and such that had so much texture to them. And so another thing that grew out of that was texture. So I started working with puppets, which we could talk about. But what I was trying to get to here was the idea of texture, and that we live in we were talking about this glass and steel buildings. And one of the strange things that's happened is that we have flattened out so many surfaces. And you really see this with modern architecture, but not only modern architecture. You see it, the screen itself is flat.
Yeah.
Our fonts are often flat, the typeface, so much of what we do is in flat, dead spaces. A shopping mall is generally a flat, dead space. So many of our suburbs are flat, dead spaces. And I was in Prague the other day, and I'm looking around. I'm talking about
talk about the total difference being in Prague.
But here's the weird thing about that. I'm walking through this one. I had to take a video of it that I'm going to use at some point. I'm walking through this one beautiful, like, narrow lane. But what's on it? Endless graffiti tags.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and it's all over Prague. And I'm sitting there going, like, I was in New York City in 1980 when this stuff was, early and just happening. And I'm sitting there going, like, well, I understood why they did it then, because the subways and all this, they wanted to get the flat, dead space. But they moved on to the beautiful spaces too. They don't recognize the difference, nor do they seemingly recognize the difference between this graffiti tagging stuff and actual street art. And so for me, one of the things, so there's two things going on here. One is texture, but then there's the question of why would they deface something beautiful? And it has to do with the fact that Prague is also this tourist mecca now. And so it's almost, I think Walker Percy once said, is looking like sucking. The more we do, the more people who do it, the less there is to look at. And I think what's happened is, in a different sort of way, Prague gets emptied by the tourists, and the whole tourist trap culture is a flattening of reality itself.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult because we all do it. I mean, it's like I love traveling through Europe and I love visiting things, but there's definitely a sense in which tourism participates in entertainment culture. It's a form of entertainment. You go places to consume images and to consume experiences, but you don't have the sense of participation that is really what enlivens the world and what creates the deep connections. So, I mean, one of the things we've been trying to do, my wife and I, is that we almost never travel just to go see things. We always travel if we have friends inviting us places. And so it's like we go to Belgium because a friend of ours says, why don't you come spend 2 weeks in Belgium? We go to their apartment. We don't go to a hotel. And then you spend half the time just being with the family. And then the next half, then you walk around, they show you around, they kind of introduce you to their world. So to me, that'd been a way to kind of to fight the tourist tendency. But I felt myself getting annoyed because I'm not efficient enough. It's like, wow, I really wanted to see this thing. I really wanted to see this thing. But now, because I'm with friends, I can't see everything that I wanted to see. We all have that in us.
Well, when I go to Prague, I'm always going there for one specific reason. Now it's to see friends, but originally it was to see puppets.
Okay, yeah.
And so I've always gone there to look at the art, and that art has always put me back. And then I remember the first time I went there, it was like a December in the year 2000. And I was there to look for some puppet theaters. It was the first time I was really interested in doing that. And then I walked into the middle of the old town square, and I looked up, and there wasn't nearly as many tourists as there are now there. And I looked up around me and I said, I'm in Prague. Because I saw it, but the good thing was I wasn't there to check the list. I was there for something. And what I eventually learned about, I've been working on interviewing puppeteers in Europe for years. Since 2012, I've been doing this seriously. And one thing I learned was that when I arrive in a city looking for its puppets, I see the city. But other people arrive, and when they arrive, they don't see the city. Because especially the more you're just like a stone on the surface skipping across it, on your way to your next city. I go to immerse myself because I'm saying, why is this certain kind of Sicilian marionette happen in Palermo or whatever? And I go there, and suddenly I'm connected to the entire history, but because they're one of the oldest forms of puppetry, I'm connected to Sicilian history, and I connect it with the buildings I see, and I connect it with the people I meet. And and it's got such a strange, interesting history,
So I'm fascinated. I'm interested in thinking of how you see the symbolism of puppets. Like, what do you think is going on?
Yeah.
In terms of attention,
people often use the symbolism of puppet as, you're being manipulated.
Right. Yeah. In the Pinocchio story, that's what the way it's used. Yeah.
Yeah. To which I and most puppeteers would immediately go like, because we're saying, no, you don't get it. There was a French puppeteer, I'm trying to remember his name, it might come to me, who did a performance with one single marionette, I don't know, come up to about his hips. And the performance was that the marionette looks up at him and realizes he's on a string.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, okay. And then he yanks it down. And at the end, the marionette yanks all the strings. Of course, the puppeteer really has another set of strings he's holding them up with.
Right.
But he yanks the final one and he dies.
Mm.
And so in the string marionette, it's also about the connection upwards.
Yeah.
And the name of the book and documentary I've been working on is called Gravity from Above, because there was a quote that said the gravity of puppets is stronger from above than it is from below, which is how they move,
mm-hmm.
And they move with grace. So
there must be a reality of the puppet, which is that, let's say, the actual type of puppet, or the shape or the form, or let's say what type of animal or human, or the length of the arms will contrive the manipulation. It will actually probably affect the manner in which because it'll affect the manner in which you can move. Then it will have its own kind of, let's say, exactly the way that a top down and bottom up relationship works, which is that the reality of the embodiment will, let's say, manifest the specificity. Like, so you're moving it to the degree that in the life of the puppet itself, it won't be, you couldn't just decide like, oh, I wanted to do this show, but I don't have the usual puppet I have. I'll just use this puppet that I found and do the same thing. It's like, well, probably that wouldn't work.
No,
it's a different.
And it's also there's several different styles of puppetry. So there's, in English, we would call this the marionette, but in French, marionnette is all the different puppets.
Mm.
But so in English, that's the stringed puppet. Then there's the hand or glove puppet, marionette again, which is controlled by the puppeteer inside. Now, those tend to be strange, rascally characters, almost alternative identities or confronting identities more often to not only the puppeteer, but to all the children who come to watch these plays, like Guignol in France. In Paris, there's a Parisian and a Lyonnaise version of the Guignol. And I've watched these performances, and a Guignol is also not just the Guignol character, who is actually a kind of a sassy, silk weaver. But there's also anything like that in France they're all Guignols, these little things. And they would beat each other, which is how we also later got the phrase Grand Guignol, because that was the big things hitting each other. But that was when you see production that was really bloody. But so and often the symbolism for that character goes back to the Commedia dell'arte, and it goes back to particularly Punchinella and out of Italy, which ends up being like there was Polichinelle in France, and there's a rascally little character in almost every European country, going as far as Turkey. And there was supposedly one in Georgia a while back. There's certainly one in Russia, Petrushka. But the worst one of all is the English one, Punch. And he is a total psychopath. And he is one of the darkest characters in fiction. And that is to say, his wife gives him the baby to watch out for. He ends up killing the baby. The wife comes home. He kills the wife. And it's hysterically funny. It's hard to believe. We actually did one version of this in Alaska. And I had two different reactions. One was people were laughing uncontrollably. And the other was there were a few people who were really horrified. But there was this one young girl who was about 3 years old who kept throwing the baby back into the little castellet. So these characters are really strange. Now, kind of connected to this, but kind of connected to the marionette is the ventriloquist dummy, and I would say the ventriloquist dummy is the eeriest of all.
Oh yeah,
because unlike most of the other puppets we've talked about, it moves its mouth and sometimes its eyes, and it seems to have a life of its own. And so many movies have been made about this thing. What if it's really?
This scary, this like possessed. The idea that because the doll is possessed, he's possessed by the ventriloquist. But the idea that it would be possessed by some other spirit, by some kind of demonic thing. Because when you see the doll, you get a sense of possession. You do, because it really does look embodied, and you hear it speak as if it's the one speaking. So it's inevitable that it would lead to that type of interpretation. But in terms of the Punchinella, it's Punch and these different characters, do you see that there would be? A lot of these marionettes, a lot of these kind of hand puppets and these puppet things would probably be part of carnival, which is why these characters, these kind of rascally, transgressive characters, would be so prominent in their.
Yes, and they go back to the Commedia dell'arte characters, whom I'm reading more about. I just read a whole book. There was a book of philosophy, all through the character of Punchinella in Venice, where evidently he was originated. And you start realizing that this character, when it's a masked character, he has a very large nose and a humpback, and there's this kind of triangular white hat and such. And there was this one artist, Tiepolo, who drew Punchinella after Punchinella, sometimes 20 of them on a page in one drawing. And this philosopher was looking, and he said, and he was also bringing stories about Punchinella. He says, one of the legends of Punchinella is when you take off the mask, there is no face.
Oh yeah.
So, the puppet, and there's other types of puppets too. There's the rod puppet, which kind of originated in Indonesia, but eventually came to Europe. There's the Japanese bunraku puppet, which is one of the most complicated of all, because it's basically, you might have seen this with characters in black holding a puppet. So you don't really see the characters. In Japan, there are usually 2 characters in black and 1 master. And the 2 characters in black, the first one, who is the most, he's like the intern, the amateur. He's the one who's newer. He controls like the left side of the body and the left leg. The other one controls the right side of the body and one of them, and maybe one of the hands. And the master controls the right hand and the face. And to go from the entry level position to become a master takes about 25 years.
The Japanese culture.
But that's
so there are 3 people running one puppet, basically.
Exactly, and the puppet is about half a human size. And there will also be, several puppets which will have, their own little crew. So. And the movements are super subtle. I could make some thoughts about what this might mean in Japan, but Japan is such an alternative world artistically and culturally that it's I wouldn't want to say too much about it, except to say, oh my goodness, is that filled with symbolic resonance? But of a kind of symbolism I don't fully understand.
So I have a question in terms of the puppets, which is that, for example, like do you like the type of puppetry that you're involved in, does it connect back to these ancient tropes, or is it more trying to find new stories and a new public? Because like who would be the public for puppets now?
That's a good question. Let me just add one more thing. There is one more very, very important type of puppet, and that is, well, actually 2. But one that's very important for theater, and that is the shadow puppet.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
shadow puppet, as you can tell, is the most ethereal of all.
Mm.
And there's two ways of getting it. One is to have kind of a flat character behind the screen held with rods.
Mm.
And that seems to have originated in China and Indonesia, but has since been in Europe for quite a while, about 500 years. And then it is also done, and this is probably the most primitive form of puppetry, as hand shadows, making the little animal shadows from, fire, I guess. You could do it.
Yeah.
But I have friends who do it here. They do animals, but they also do abstract hand shadows. And they did a somewhat condensed version of the Bach's St. Matthew's Passion as hand shadow abstractions, which included puppets that kind of look like churches moving along. It was absolutely fantastic. What's the audience for puppets? Well, here's the thing. In North America, actually Canada is better for this than the US. In North America, the general prejudice is that, well, first of all, there's one big, huge thing in the way of everyone really coming to understand puppets, the Muppets, which is why I've been doing puppetry in Europe and interviewing, because here you can go from the most primitive and authentic all the way to the most avant-garde and abstract and everything in between. You can do every kind of puppet here without going too far. Where in America, you could probably do that, but it would require thousands of miles of travel, But
you hit up against Jim Henson pretty fast. Like the Muppets just.
Well, that's the thing. And so even things like Avenue Q or other, puppets, they're often just nasty puppets if they want to do them for adults. It's just, but they're Muppets.
Right. Yeah. They're just vulgar or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Muppets are essentially a kind of hand puppet with a couple of rods.
Yeah.
You can manipulate it this way, but you're still using the hand predominantly and then rods sometimes connecting it. And of course, there are all sorts of other tricks that they use for the movies. But I think that what I discovered was I saw a Czech troupe called, and I just saw these guys again, and they've been friends of mine since 2005. So I was starting to say, are these guys looking older? Is it just me? But they've been doing this rather unique style. I thought it was unique style of puppetry since the mid 90s, early 90s. And their name is Buchty a Lodki, which means cakes and puppets, which is kind of named after the American organization called Bread and Puppets, which of course is named after bread and circuses. Without going into all of that, but what they used to do though, when they first started their show, is hand out little cakes that they would sell in the store in plastic wrappers to people during the show. So that's why they call them cakes and puppets. Yeah. But these guys and gals have been doing something. Well, when I first saw them, I had seen all these other puppet forms. Shadow puppets and guignols and experimental puppets in the puppetry school in Charleville-Mézières in France. And then I came and saw these guys. And it was just the most anarchic, weird thing I'd ever seen, because they look like so much of their stuff. It was like broken puppets, bits of metal, like a big metal saw that they found in someone's backyard or something, just all sorts of whatever was available.
Yeah. So like animating objects you didn't expect that they would be puppets.
Yeah. And
giving life
puppet,
to things that you didn't think.
Like they had a mermaid puppet that was inside a big jar with water in it, and they would blow through a tube and get bubbles out of it. And I was just, what's going on here? And they did a Sherlock Holmes Hound of Baskervilles. And at one point, Sherlock says to Watson, we need some tea. And all of a sudden, a couple of full-size cups are put in with these little puppets, and they pour this, I think it was just hot water, over into the cups. It's spilling all over. Meanwhile, the little puppets are holding this. And then there are two of the cast members actually standing on either side of the puppet stage, drinking from tea, dressed a bit like Sherlock Holmes. And I was just like, wow, I didn't know you could do this. And so this confirmed everything. This particular trip in 2000 confirmed everything that I had suspected about puppetry. That as an art form, you could pretty much do everything. You couldn't do the kind of psychological realism you can do in movies or in stage plays, but pretty much everything else. I mean, you can even represent God in various ways, like you just turn off the lights and now you can start representing God. It's just very fascinating what could be done. And I looked at that and said, we can do this in Alaska. And so what I did, though, is I didn't just bring that. I brought everything I saw with me and said, you see, I have one advantage over most of these people. I've seen all the stuff from all these countries. And so I'm bringing it all back one way or another. Obviously, I'm going to be amateurish to start with, but let's do this. And in 2009, a troop of 4 of us went around. We actually went to a few places in Canada. We drove from the Yukon Territory all the way down to Minnesota and then across to Vermont to New York City, where we played in a rock club. We then played, we played in such weird places. We played in like high schools, played in a Christian high school, played in someone's backyard in Texas, played for like some sort of, I think it was Reed University in Portland, Oregon, in someone's house. And that's when someone came up to me and said, I didn't know you could do this. I'm going to go home and start making puppets now. Someone came up to me and said, wow, it was so great to see something that wasn't digital. To which I said, right, which is exactly the point. And we made a really complex show based on the Tower of Babel. And so what we did was we hit it on so many different levels. We also had tower metaphors like King Kong on the tower, Rapunzel in the tower, Kennedy shot from like a tower. It's just like all these tower images, Vertigo, the tower. But then we were doing things related to the Bible as well. I had a friend doing shadow puppets about Nimrod's dreams about language. And so we did all of these things and used so many weird historical references. I had a couple of guys walk up to me and say, was that Edgar Allan Poe? No. They said, was that William Faulkner? And I said, no, that was Edgar Allan Poe. And he turns to his friend and said, I told you. And that was such great engagement. And because I've been in situations, I know a lot about rock music, and was a tour manager for a while. And I remember being in some show in 2005 in Berlin. Someone invited me, and there are 3 bands playing. One was from England, one was from America, one was from, I don't know, New Zealand or someplace. But it was at a rock club. So we went there, and I looked around and I said, everyone's just doing what they're supposed to do here. Some people are really cool, hanging out in the back, slightly nodding their head. Other people are getting into the music, And I was saying but the experience these people get are going to be exactly what they thought they would get. Whereas I'm going out, even in Berlin before I'd gotten to the Czech Republic, and I'm watching shadow puppets, and I'm watching former Eastern European puppeteers, and I'm saying, my mind is being blown. I said, this music stuff doesn't hold a candle to this, because this is the antidote to too much digital screen, everything being adapted to the screen.
Yeah.
So we took our show around. I did have one girl who came up after what was probably our best show in North Carolina. And she said, that really disturbed me. I said, really? Why? She said, I could tell you were trying to get us to think, but you weren't telling us how. In other words, I wasn't giving her the content of, I was making her put pieces together. And I said, well, that was the point. Because I said, our problems are so bad right now that unless we start using our minds again and being able to put ideas together, we won't be able to solve any problems. And more than one, so many people said to me, I had no idea what this was going to be. And if I had known, I would have dragged so many friends there. We lost money on it, so I never did it again. I did get a grant to do that. And it took 2 months. I think we did 22 shows, but it was an amazing experience. And what I proved to myself, what I already knew from Alaska, was that anybody can get this, and there are different levels of meaning. So
yeah, I'd to be honest with you, I've never really thought that much about puppets. I mean, I think it's interesting because there really is a sense of understanding embodiment, which I could imagine, like as you're also becoming conscious, as you're moving the puppet, you become conscious of certain gestures that you wouldn't be so conscious of. I've had that experience watching puppets when I look at the subtlety of, especially very subtle, string puppets. And I realize that I can see gesture that I usually don't see in humans, but that is there. But there's just a little bit of exaggeration, very, very slight, which makes you notice, like the trembling of a hand or the, let's say, the overcompensation of certain stances. And so there is a sense, like I could definitely see that the moments when I've paid attention to puppets, let's say. But what do you think, is because let's say for us, puppet in America, it's true that puppets, it's not just the Muppet Show, but it's also Sesame Street, like with the way when we grew up, what do you think is what's going on there? Like what is happening with Sesame Street and the Muppet Show? Because a lot of it seems to be something like monsters, like especially in Sesame Street, all these kind of monstrous characters and the Cookie Monster and what is it, Count the Dracula character and all these. Right. But I don't know if you thought about Jim Henson's Jim Henson's takeover of.
But there is one big element of all Muppet shows, even if it's not under the name of Henson. I mean, I've been to churches where they do little Christian stories with little puppets that are essentially Muppets of a sort. Muppets are, one of their main central features is your hand is inside the mouth making it move. Yeah. But what's going on up here is generally something plush and cute.
Right. Yeah.
And the subject,
like a teddy bear. Yeah, it's like a teddy bear, an animated.
Right. But the subject of cute is something I've really been thinking about for a long time, and I'm getting to the point where I did write about it on. I have a essay site where I wrote about it, but I'm getting ready to do a video on it. And there are things we just don't think about. Fun is one of those things, and especially the teleological notion of fun. The fun is a purpose for life. But cute is right up there. Cute is kind of baby-like. Yeah. Cute has also been mingled with so many other things. And it is a way of smuggling messages in. Disney learned this probably earliest, that he could smuggle messages through the big-eyed Mickey. When Mickey started off as a rat, and ends up by the Sorcerer's Apprentice having these big eyes, and that's the way he's remained. And eventually Japanese would pick up on this. They would pick up on what happened with Disney, and then they would make all their anime figures. So many people use big-eyed anime or big-eyed cute creatures for their avatars online.
Yeah, for sure.
And what I've seen is it's almost like, you've thought about art. You've been to art school. And one of the things I've seen is, okay, so we went through all this stuff to get to, say, through the modern era. And then now the postmodern era is filled with ironies and eventually the message, the woke message started to show up in it. But I'm thinking like, yeah, but postmodernism is like post-impressionism. It's not the end of the line. It's just a way station before we get to the next thing. And I started thinking to myself, I think this cute stuff is the next thing. That is to say, I think that our art has turned into, there's something juvenile about it. Yeah. What is the relationship of this kind of art to the geek? How can you take Leatherface from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, which I actually love. I don't like any of the remakes, and then make a bobblehead out of it that's got big eyes. You see, there's something that's happened there so that everything can be condensed down to these big-eyed things. Yeah. Now, I'm told that the Japanese didn't see the big-eyed anime creatures as looking like foreigners, even though to us, it's just like, well, they don't look like you do. But they thought they look like themselves as a weird mirror of their inner essence. And one of the things the Japanese did was added sex and violence to them to make cute things, kawaii is the word they use, but it's to make them sexual, sometimes pornographic, and to make them sometimes very violent. Now, interestingly enough, when they do the really macho ones, then they give them the more squinty eyes. But I think this big-eyed thing, I did a...
It definitely has to do with wonder. It definitely has to do with, let's say, forcing or a technique for introducing something like childlike wonder, or bringing people back into a sense of childlike wonder, but then playing with that, twisting it. You can see it in like the weird, because it's not just the Japanese, like all the weird
it's
My Little Pony obsession that people had with the bronies, they were called, or whatever. These 20-something-year-olds that became enamored with My Little Pony. I think there's a sense of disenchantment. People are disenchanted. They feel like the world is, and so they're looking for a sense of connectedness, and they're looking to their own childhood, because maybe that's the place where they remember, like watching Star Wars for the first time, or having some experience of wonder and wanting to recapture that, instead of moving towards kind of deeper versions of enchantment. There's an easy one, like you said, there's a moment of connecting to your teddy bear when you were 4 years old or whatever, and then you just perpetuate that forever in your life.
Yeah, which I think it has everything to do with identity and the loss of it. That is, when people can know, having lost their sense of being made in the image of God, they then construct an image of themselves. And if you can kind of get that cute smile out of the person looking at that image, going, oh, if you get that, and it's like unassailable, because it's almost like you're attacking children. What kind of monster would do that? Well, I'm that monster, evidently, but I think that. But
you're right; it has to do with identity, because the avatar is the ultimate example of that. And the furry culture is the extreme version of that type of thing, like the cute animal that is then weirdly sexualized and weirdly, it's like a weird connection between this childlike wonder and a kind of twisted version of identity and sex and everything. No, definitely. I think you're on.
I made a video called 21st Century Cargo Cults. And that's where I really get into this stuff. But my thought is, the cargo cult being if you build it, they will come, and I go into this much more, but that's the American version. So if we collect the Star Wars memorabilia, we will remain with the Force being with us. If we collect the MCU statues and comics, we will be aligned properly with the stars, which are evidently falling in on us as Galactus is about to arrive or something.
Yeah. Well, for sure, consuming has become, because consuming is actually a way of participating. It is a way of participating, and so we've reduced participation to consuming, and it's like a weaponized version of participation, where big companies make huge amounts of money because they know that buying something is a way of participating. It's not the deepest way, but it is a way of participating in something.
Well, these things have become religious, totally. And they are symbols for what we hope we are. That is to say, the wide-eyed, childlike. It's a inverted, becoming as children.
That's a great perception you've got there.
Yeah, but the difference is that most of these people don't understand the difference between being childlike and childish.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big moments where this culture starts is during the hippie revolution in San Francisco, because the whole point was to basically experience ecstasy, not the drug, but LSD, the drug, acids, but getting stoned, getting high, whatever, and just acting like a child. And all the original San Francisco footage that we have, and I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area during that time, and I saw it. People essentially, I had a friend who was telling me before she became a Christian, she said, me and my friend Nancy used to sit in puddles on LSD, like puddles on the side of the road after a rain, and just be like, but of course the problem was, if everyone's a child, Where are the adults?
Yeah.
Eventually, the adults swooped in the form of cults and, all sorts of things to
Capture, they prey on
the
attention, prey on that kind of sense of wonder. Yeah.
and that's where we were moving. I mean, there's a total connection here between the cute stuff, the geek culture that consumes it and has been spreading outside of its geek confines, and the identity politics. And it's amazing how many of the people involved with identity politics, that whole thing of, you've heard of the person who's the dragonkin or the deerkin, where they have these, it's not only that they're a different gender, but they're a different species gender. But all these things, you look at it and it's like when they pretend to be a cat or a dog, they're doing it like they're a little child. They're doing it like, this is cute. How can you criticize this?
Yeah, well, there's a weird kind of contradiction in the narrative, and I've seen it because the thing that kind of woke me up to this is when I heard, I think it's one of the Wachowski sisters by now, I guess, saying that the Matrix is extremely close to that kind of LGBTQ culture because it's about self-creation. Yeah. And it was super interesting to hear the creator of the Matrix say that, because the self-creation of the Matrix, first of all, happens in the Matrix, which is like the whole movie's about kind of getting out of it, but it happens in the Matrix. And then you realize that there's a sense in which a lot of this is a desire to self-create, to will yourself into being, like to kind of will yourself into the identity that you want to have. But then at the same time, there's this other narrative, which is joined together, which is like, you're born this way. Like there's nothing, you can't change it. This is who you are. This is what you are. So it's hard to kind of get these two to dive sometimes.
Those things have actually been wrestling with each other. In the 90s, it was more born this way.
Yeah.
And then came this new, more fluid idea of gender and identity and everything. Although it doesn't work with race. People get a little bit more worried about you if you, for instance, wear blackface. But nobody gets worried about you if you swap your gender. And I tend to look at them as very parallel experiences in a certain way.
Yeah, well, we had a few of the people who had said that they feel a certain race. Like that happened. I forget her name. Yeah, there are a few of them, but they don't have the support, at least from the same people. That it's interesting because you're right. It is in a way, because race is as much, if gender is a construct, like race is way more a construct than gender.
And they'll say that too. If you really get into reading the Ibram X. Kendi and stuff, they'll say race is a construct forced upon us by the white supremacist. But then they do a weird flip where it's kind of like, it's like they're saying, okay, we're this thing and you can't criticize us, anything we do anymore, since you made us this way. But I think that, for instance, one thing I also thought of, and this totally relates to the Wachowskis and such, which is a very Gnostic film about, in classic Gnosticism, you had all these layers between the most divine of the divine, and then down here, the mud and the dirt and the gunk. And in some Gnostic theories, down here at the bottom, that's where the God of the Old Testament was. And Christ was somewhere further up, leading us to another demiurge. But when someone today, we've had, decades and decades of the following message: I have to become myself.
Yeah.
And to which my thought is, well, who are you right now? And there's something very Gnostic about that. So that eventually, then we started seeing this break where you can't define me. Biology can't define me. Nothing defines me but my imagistic, my symbolic idea of myself.
Yeah. Yeah, my imagination about myself, that's for sure. But in the Matrix, everything is so upside down in the Matrix. Because, and I think that's why the Wachowskis are even confused about their own work, because on the one hand, the place where you can create, and it's true, like even now, it's like the only place where you can create your own identity is in a system of absolute, like where everything variable is controlled for you. Like every variable is safe. And that's where you can now create your identity. Because like in a world where there's a lion outside the door and there's that you might miss your crops, or you don't know if you're going to have enough, if you're going to have enough wood to spend the winter or whatever. Like in that world, you can't do that. It's just, you don't have the luxury of living in a kind of imaginary world. So it's like the Matrix actually provides the possibility of this weird self-creation. So it's like it's actually the mechanism of control that like that. I've talked about this quite a bit, that actually the modern world is two extremes. It's like it's anarchy and authoritarianism kind of facing each other, and that those two extremes play off each other. So you can only be a punk rocker in a world that is completely square. Like you can't be a punk rocker in a normal kind of more organic world, because you're just going to die. You're just going to die. You're not going to eat. You're just going to die. And so there's a play like between, and I think that's part of it. So once you see that, you kind of understand why there's a relationship between, let's say, the internet systems of control that are becoming fiercer and fiercer, and at the same time, this weird kind of avatar ideology, like kind of metaverse ideology, where you create your own identity and you're free to be whatever you want. But for that to even be possible, you actually need to be completely controlled and completely boxed in.
Well, you're right. There is an authoritarianness. Where the authoritarian aspect lies is in all this junk we've built. All the possibilities of technology, all those hardened building structures, all these systems. And this is what Jacques Ellul spends so much time talking about. And then my feeling is that this whole thing of becoming yourself and all the, it's just like, okay, so I've got a bone through my nose, and I've got tattoos now. Ooh, I'm tribal. But what that means is, this is the bribe. This is what we're paying you off with, so you don't use those parts of yourself that really would bother us. Like, that's
interesting. Yeah. So metaverse is a bribe for you to accept like the absolute systems of control. That's a great way of thinking. Yeah, it's a great.
It is. It's absolutely a bribe. That's also how the objectivity and subjectivity thing works. Is that there is this objectivity. It's this stuff that we have built to contain all of the whenever there's a new problem, and Ellul says all problems in technology are solved by another technology. Every technology will have another problem. The only way to solve it is through a technology. And that's just the system. He talks about, like, if you have a road that goes between New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut, the only thing you can do is widen the road perpetually. You can't really tell people not to use their cars. That just doesn't fit. So technology is always going in one specific kind of direction, which is containment. But so we all feel this sense of this thing around us, and a lot of it is buttressed by someone's idea of science. I don't think it's necessarily a popular idea of science would be the best way to describe it. And then people, it's interesting. So they live in a world where suddenly they say, well, everything is just subjective.
Yeah.
All the concrete authoritarian junk surrounding them, the technological stuff influencing them, the propaganda they live with day and night, is completely conditioning them. But they're over here saying, you really can't know anything. How can you talk about symbolism a lot. One of the things I've come to see is that propaganda is always the deformation of symbols.
Oh yeah. And it's not, I think one of the reasons why both my brother and I really wanted to talk about symbolism so much is because we noticed that it seems that a lot of the people that were doing propaganda, they had mastered symbolic thinking in a certain manner and were weaponizing it, using it with only one purpose. And so that's why if you look at the kind of woke, a lot of the woke Disney stuff, and especially in the kids' movies, the some of the symbolism they use is pristine. Like it's perfect. They really understood the imagery. They're using it perfectly. It's just that it's weaponized towards a strange subversion. And so trying to get, and as Christians, we're just materialist and, we're arguing about some stupid text that they found in Qumran, whatever, like something they found in the desert in Egypt, and we're arguing about that. All the hippies now like had kind of infiltrated. They had gotten some aspect of symbolism right, like the feminists, like all of these types of thinkers had gotten even like, let's say, the neo-Marxists, they gotten some aspect of symbolism very, very right, and they're able to like apply it in ways that were powerful. Even when you read Marx, you see that Marx, even though he said he was a complete materialist, he used symbolism perfectly. Like he understood revolutionary symbolism perfectly. The types of images he would bring up would really be straight up revolutionary images in their mythological form. And so, but people, it's like we need people to understand it so that they can be immune to the weaponized version of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've been grateful for what you've done. I think you've done a lot in that realm. One of the things I was thinking, and I mentioned texture earlier, is that I actually think that besides whatever symbolic aspect there is, there's another layer of symbolism beneath the more obvious layers. And that is to say, for instance, as I've looked at texture, I've seen that the textures themselves are kind of like a nutrition. And that is to say, if you live, for instance, if we all lived with walls like our refrigerator, particularly a white refrigerator, if we had that for our walls, we were not allowed any sort of decoration, although the desire to make graffiti on that kind of a surface would be overwhelming, But if that was our life, something would be wrong with us. We are influenced, and it's not even images as much as it is the fact that, you work with wood. You understand, looking at wood, that almost every piece of wood is like a living, breathing, even though it's been cut and killed. It's got so many textures in it. And to carve it, you have to look at those textures. You have to say, which way is the grain going?
Yeah, well, it's the texture is something like it's the glory of the particular. Like that's what texture is. It's like particular things have a glory of being particular. They have an excess. They have a kind of overflowing of their particularity, which is not necessarily directly related to their purpose or their identity, but nonetheless organically, let's say, adds, like you said, for example, like let's say I'm building a house, and I realize that one piece of wood is particularly beautiful in its grain. Well, that's not, it wouldn't have to be for the house to be functional, but because of its particularity, it adds to the glory of the house. It adds kind of this I often talk about how there's a relationship between death and glory. There's a relationship between the thorns as all this like excess of particularity. It's like granular particularity, and how it can become a type of glory. You see that like in the Psalms, it says that even the white hair on the head of an old person is their glory. And so it's like, as they become, let's say, particular, as they age and their texture starts to appear, and you see someone who ages, all of a sudden they start to shine. If you're attentive, they start to shine in a way that's very different from like a beautiful young woman. Let's say there's a different kind of shine to it, like experience. That is the particularity of that person. That's glowing.
Yeah, well, one thing I discovered about texture is that nobody is looking at it. Nobody's talking about it, except now and then people in the fashion industry, and most ominously, people in the computer graphics realm.
Yeah, they're very pretty.
They want to know how to reproduce it. But meanwhile, we're emptying it out. So many people live in white boxes where the only real texture is their television screen. Mm-hmm. They live with artificial objects. I've been looking for furniture recently. It is so hard to find real wood. It's like
more and
so
more.
much
For
stuff.
sure, it's different. It's not that it's hard to find; that it's expensive now. It's like because if you want to have a real thing, it's expensive to have a real thing, and that's
exactly. And we've been conditioned to not care about the real thing.
Yeah, but you're totally right. Like we rebuilt our house in 2019. and because of the flood. And
Right.
my wife was very particular to have matte, like this kind of old matte paint, like this I think lime paint on the walls in the house. And it's like, we're used to it. It's acrylic paint that just shines, and you don't even realize that it reflects the light all the time. You don't notice it. But man, in my living room feels amazing. And it's because of that. It's because of the texture of the walls that it creates this warm space.
And I think that, for instance, talking about nature, you're talking about the particularity, but I think there's like two things going on at once. One is, for instance, you take a forest and a mountain, for instance, and you look and you see all these trees. At first, you just see the huge thing, the image that comes to you, and you can't really find the particularity of it. It's just the forest, the desert, the ocean, these large, vistas and such. And then you get close to it and you start to notice that every tree is different. Every needle on the trees is different. Every leaf is different. Every bug is different. Yeah. And in fact, the further you go into the human biology and to matter itself, every cell is different. Every atom is different. Every subatomic particle is different, moving slightly differently. Yeah. There is this thing. So, but at the same time, we need the large. We need space. We need the vistas. I was just I'm right next to a mountain here, and before it snowed recently, but a few weeks back before I moved here, I was up on top. Well, it's not really the top, but the top of this section of it, and looking down about 300, 400, more like 500, 600 meters. And I was saying, like, why is this so satisfying? Why is height so satisfying? Why are we attracted to mountains? Or why did people used to be afraid of them? I think it's actually the same question, but with a different mindset. Why is it when we're up on a mountain, we look down at the city or at whatever is down below us, we get this sensation? And it's a sensation of, in one sense, we're on top of everything, but on another sense, it's that grandeur between us. It's the glory between us, which is a very different sensation of being at the bottom of a ravine. It's well,
I think there definitely is a sense of elation. There's a reason why Moses goes up a mountain to encounter God, because there's a manner in which you can contain more reality in your grasp the higher you are. And that's why we use the image of height to talk about a king or someone who is actually higher up in a political hierarchy, because you contain more under you the higher up you are. And so that's that sense of grandeur.
It's definitely a symbolic relationship we are having at that point.
Oh, for sure.
I don't think any amount of discussion of biology is going to help us understand that relationship. At this point, it's really all, there's some message we are receiving. It's why, so many cults would occupy they would build the idols on top of mountains, but also the transfiguration happens on top of mountains.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Moses receives the law and the mountain becomes an image all through the Bible. Mount Zion becomes an image of like the place where God encounters people. And Christ goes up the mountain actually quite a bit, not even just on the transfiguration, but when he goes to pray, there are many times when he goes up the hill to pray and to come into contact with God. So definitely, but being at the bottom of a ravine is also symbolic in the sense that it is that you can have a sense of death. Let's say when you're at the bottom of a pit, you can really get a sense of being surrounded and being contained, and also being less free, like feeling like you have less freedom or you're trapped. Let's say you can feel all those things when you're at the bottom of a pit or in a hole, or if you fall into a hole, let's say, then you can get that sense of why death or that, why hell is represented underground, because it's an intuition that we have when it happens to us. Like if you sink underwater, when you fall, it's when you fall and you hit your head on the ground and you're down there on the ground, and all you see is the particular, let's say, and you don't have a sense of scope and of scale and what is going on in general. You're kind of Vern, I need to go. I
figured you did.
This kind of just sped right through it. It was really nice to meet you, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I figured we would eventually meet, so I wasn't particularly worried about that. So there's lots more to talk about. Someday we probably will.
Yeah, I mean, reach out again. Like if you have some thoughts that you'd like to talk about in particular, I mean, I think that the channel of conversation is open, and I try to, with people that I feel are akin to the project that I'm doing, like Paul and a few other people like that. I like to stay connected and to check in a few times because even some of the things you talked about, I need to think about, and it's given me some interesting insights.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about symbolism since the 80s. And I don't know, have you ever picked up J.R. Serlot's book called The Dictionary of Symbolism? His open, it's probably the best book on symbolism. He's a Spaniard. This book was written, I think, in the 1950s or 60s. And there's a lot of different editions of it that were done.
What's his name?
J.R. Serlot. Serlot is spelled C-I-R-L-O-T. And Dictionary of Symbols, there's a lot of, you can get a cheap hardback of that. It's been reproduced a lot of times. But his introductory essay in that, which is about 25 pages long, is absolutely amazing. And I find the book endlessly, like going through it, he really pulls out a lot of interesting ideas.
I'll check it out. I tend to always avoid symbolic dictionaries because I feel
I know what you mean.
Contrived.
Yeah, but his is the only one that I really recommend.
Cool.
So, I've been dealing with this. Part of it was, I don't know if you know who Hans Ruckmacher is, the art historian.
Oh, you mean the art critic?
Yeah, Christian art historian.
Yeah, I know who he is.
And he talks about the symbolic. And I have a lecture on my, his daughter gave me permission to annotate visually some of his lectures and put them on my site. And his What is Reality is amazing because he talks about the scientific view of reality, which is that everything is matter or energy. And he says, meanwhile, what about the heart? Is it just this beating thing, or is there some reason why? And he says, because either one of those views is going to win. And he says, we've lost as Christians our more symbolic understanding. Yeah,
but I don't know. Don't you feel like it's changing? Like I feel like right now there's like going.
I do. He did that in the 70s. But I do feel it's changing. How is it changing? Is it for the good? We'll see. I think
there's a dark aspect.
I would say there are good signs.
Yeah.
And now let's hope we don't fall prey to the hatred that comes with the revenge cycle and war propaganda.
Yeah. Oh, it's good to talk. So I wish you all the courage and the best in Tbilisi. You're much closer. You're a lot closer to the conflict than we are. So
I feel like I've got a ringside seat, and I hope that the event doesn't spill over. So, and that's what everybody else here now hopes to.
Yeah. Well,
it can easily spill over.
So. Well, God protects you, Vern, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
And as the Georgians say, "Kagad ik avi," which means be well.
All right. Bye. It's good to talk to you.
Send me a copy of this.
Cool. I will.
Thanks. Well, I would like to thank Jonathan for being on the show for an Anadromous dialogue, and I hope you all will come back again soon. Poke around if you're new. If you're not new, poke around. I'm sure there's stuff you haven't watched yet. And remember, the word Anadromous means going against the current, to swim back upstream like a salmon does. And I wish you would all do that. And may we find peace during these times, particularly the peace of God.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.